Hi everyone, this is Spiro with Newsbud. Today I'm joined with Sibel Edmonds, who is the founder, editor, and publisher of Newsbud. I'm also joined with Professor Filip Kovacevic, who is Newsbud's senior analyst for Russia and the Balkans. He is a Montenegrin geopolitical author, a university professor, and the chairman of the Movement for Neutrality in Montenegro. Welcome you both. Filip, you just recently arrived back stateside from a trip to the Balkans. How was your trip?
Yes, I have, Spiro. My trip was very good. However, the situation in the Balkans, politically and economically speaking, is not good. What's happening in the Balkans is that there is a lot of public dissatisfaction with both domestic and foreign agenda that the political elites are putting forward. And also, we are seeing the presence of some new geopolitical actors. They have become stronger recently, such as Russia and China. And the reason that those fairly new geopolitical actors, at least since the end of the Cold War, are able to gain more and more influence is that the Western neoliberal economic policies have failed. Essentially, these policies have destroyed people's livelihoods. The emphasis on privatization, no matter what, on austerity measures, has destroyed the education and health systems in these countries. Because from the very beginning, this transformation was ideological. It was not based on the situation and conditions on the ground. In other words, the IMF and the World Bank wanted to ideologically reshape the Balkans in accordance with certain neoliberal principles. In a certain sense, this was trying to force theory onto practice. And this is always tragic. It always leads to very tragic consequences. We have seen that in the Soviet Union, when communist ideology was forced upon people. Neoliberalism is just the same. It's an ideology. It's a conceptual schema that tries to fit certain principles to what people have on the ground. And this has not worked out in the Balkans. This is why the US and the EU influence in the Balkans is declining. However, the problem is that they will not give up so easily. They have infiltrated the elites in the Balkans. So the elites are on the side of this failing project, and the people are against that. So we are seeing a lot of political instability happening in the Balkans, and I think the situation is going to get even worse. So what I bring from the Balkans is not a lot of hope that in the coming years this region is going to be peaceful.
That's very interesting, and it's very timely, the points you just brought up, Filip, because while you were away, so much started happening in Turkey. And we had the failed attempted coup, and then afterwards we have been witnessing this polarization in terms of the public opinion shifting rapidly. I have to say it's almost shifted, basically saying enough is enough with NATO. Of course, we are seeing with the current government and all the talks and even semi-steps towards aligning Turkey more with Russia and with the East than the West. Basically, the sentiment is, with friends and allies like this, like NATO and US, who needs enemy? And I would say very conservatively, close to 85% of the public opinion in Turkey is we do not want to align ourselves with the West, with NATO. Enough is enough, because Turkey went through similar stages, even though they were not part of the Soviet bloc, but especially since early 1980s with IMF and World Bank and all the demands placed on Turkey to change both culturally and economically in order to be accepted to EU, which they still haven't. And now they're at this point saying, heck with it, we don't want to be part of the EU. I mean, it doesn't look that great from where we are at, and we are looking into this. And the same thing with NATO. And with that public sentiment that we are seeing more and more vocalized in Turkey, we have lightly touched upon the Balkans, saying that based on your articles and other great analysis by you and by other scholars, that the discontent with NATO is on escalations in the Balkans. And of course, with Greece, we have seen similar kind of moves after their economic upheaval there. So let's talk about the public sentiment. And you mentioned wisely the shift, the difference, the gap between the majority, the people on the ground versus the ruling elite, because we are witnessing the same phenomena in Turkey. We have certain layer of the academics, and rich, wealthy business people and elite military, higher level military groups who are pro-NATO and EU and the rest. But then when we are looking at the general public opinion, you're looking at a vastly different position in regard with NATO and the US. And with this shift in the Balkans, do you see any pressure similar to what we are seeing and witnessing in Turkey on the government and the elite to say we need to look eastward? And if so, how is that developing?
But that's a big question, because there are some countries in the Balkans which are members of NATO, Slovenia, Croatia, Greece, and Bulgaria, and there are others who are on the various paths to NATO. Montenegro has gone the furthest. However, even in Montenegro, we are seeing that this process of joining NATO has stopped. And here Turkey can play a very important role, because as you know, in order for Montenegro to become a member of NATO, all parliaments of member states of NATO have to ratify the protocol with Montenegro. And so Turkish parliament will have to do this too. And if they don't do it, then they will be able, in fact, to show that they have come onto the Russian side, because Russia has always been against the expansion of NATO into the Balkans. So here is a concrete example dealing with Montenegro, where Erdogan can show that he has found new allies in the East. It's something that will we can follow closely. This issue of the elites and the public is very, very important, but I have to say that the people still have not found ways to organize progressively. In other words, they are still, I think, pretty much the majority is being manipulated by various political figures who are getting logistical and financial support from the West. In my articles, I talked about the presence of Russia, the increasing presence of Russia in the Balkans, and the way that the Russian government is trying to use the tools of soft power. Soft power is a concept developed by the United States, developed by the intelligence community, the CIA in the United States, and the idea is to influence foreign populations without having to resort to military coercion or any other type of coercion. In other words, you sway the hearts and minds by using the products of popular culture and by using the agents of influence in the media, in the political parties, in the NGO community, and in the academic community. And the West has been very successful in this. We just look at the collapse of the Soviet Union and the role of the rock and roll and Coca-Cola and blue jeans and the consumerist lifestyle that have played a role in that. And now Russia is trying to develop the soft power tools of its own. And in my article, I talk about the power of the Russian Orthodox Church, because we have to take into consideration that most of the people in the Balkans are majority Orthodox. There are, of course, people belonging to Catholic religion, to Islam, but there are also many Orthodox people there. Some countries like Serbia, Montenegro, Greece, and Bulgaria are majority Orthodox, and the Orthodox churches in these countries have have a lot of power according to public opinion polls. In other words, if you look at the public opinion polls in these countries, you see that, let's say, the politicians and the political parties and the parliaments have, let's say, less than 20% of support, just like here in the United States, whereas the church, the Orthodox Church, sometimes it's even more than 50%. So you can tell that the people will be conducive to the message that the Orthodox Church is going to present to them. And the fact is that the Orthodox Church in the Balkans, the Serbian Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Bulgarian Orthodox Church, have all consistently been against NATO because they have seen NATO as the force of Western influence of other points of view and also religions. And so what's happening now is that the Russians are, through these Orthodox networks, they are trying to help the Orthodox Church and parties connected to the Orthodox Church to strengthen the anti-NATO message. And this message is becoming more and more strong because of the support that the Orthodox Church gives it.
Well, this is interesting, and I need some enlightening here, because during the Soviet Union era, in Eastern Europe and Balkans and in Russia, basically religion was illegalized. So you didn't have any activities by the churches, the Orthodoxy Church, or it was underground, basically, the movement. But after 5-6 decades, going back, with the fall of the Soviet Union, how did this revival take place? Because you're looking at 2-3 generations in the Balkans that grew up under the, atheism and communism without having that church and the power of the church. So how did this revival took place in the Balkans? And I guess to a certain degree, of course, in Russia, so quickly, when I say quickly, since 1991, for the church becoming a major player and regaining what it had lost for all these half a century?
Well, this has to do with the reaction to the Western neoliberal ideology. Neoliberalism was successful in destroying state-controlled socialism, but it was not successful in building a new set of values and beliefs. You cannot live by neoliberalism because it's all about making money being the most important value in life. And there is no spiritual and moral comfort that you can derive from the value hierarchy like that. So what happened was that neoliberalism destroyed its ideological enemy, state-controlled socialism, and then you had nothing, you had a vacuum, and then the old traditional beliefs, the religious beliefs have come back. In other words, people have reverted back to what they had before the imposition of state-controlled socialism, because this whole ideological concept collapsed. So in other words, neoliberalism brought the genie out of the bottle, and this inflamed a lot of extreme religious and nationalist feeling and passion that led to a lot of problems in the Balkans. In other words, because you had such a strong pressure from the West to conform, you also developed a strong reaction against that. It's a action and a reaction. It's one of the basic laws of physics that also can be applied in human psychology. So what's happening at this time is that you essentially still don't have any kind of ideologies that could bring all these religions together in the Balkans, and this could be a problem in the future. In other words, there has to be found a modus vivendi among different religions in the Balkans, because this region is the crossroads of 3 religions: the Catholicism, Orthodoxy, and Islam. And if we look at some previous periods in the past, we see that there were periods in the past when these 2 religions have coexisted peacefully, but there were also periods when they were fighting against each other, but they were fighting against each other only when they were instigated by the outside forces coming from the West, from the British Empire generally, and now from the United States. So we have the consistent geopolitical policy from the West, which is divide and conquer. Find differences among the people in the Balkans and emphasize them. Make weapons out of them. The MI6, the British Secret Intelligence Service, even before it was officially founded, supposedly it was officially founded at the beginning of the 20th century, but it operated for centuries before that, and they have always had this policy. And in fact, they have typically pitted Turkey against Russia. They have typically pitted the Ottoman Empire against the Russian Empire. And this is why it is so important and so difficult at this point of time to have actual cooperation between Russia and Turkey, because every time Russia and Turkey fought against each other, it was the British, the French, and later on the Americans who have benefited. If we look at the last 200 years, if we look at, let's say, the 19th century, and here I want to make a digression, most analysts, when they speak about the recent issues in the Balkans, they forget about history, And in order to understand the situation there, you have to understand the historical context. So when we talk about Russia and Turkey, we have to take into consideration the context of many wars that they have had in the past, but also many periods of cooperation. And I have to mention one in particular because it's not mentioned at all. It was immediately after the end of World War I, cooperation between, at the time, the Soviet Russia and the Turkey of Kemal Atatürk. They have cooperated quite well, which means that even though they are pretty much influenced by different religions, Turkey and Russia can work together against the other side. And when I mention Lenin and Atatürk, they had enemies in the West. Because as you know, Turkey was, during World War I, Turkey was on the side of the Central Powers, on the side of Germany and Austria-Hungary, which is the side that lost the war. So Turkey, in the immediate post-World War I period, was considered an enemy, and so was the Soviet Russia. And today, too, I think we are getting to the same point where Russia is already considered an enemy by the West, and now Turkey is as well. And so I think Putin and Erdogan can build on this tradition of post-World War I Turkey and develop methods of cooperation. I have to say one more thing, which is very important for the Balkans. If there is a lot of unrest in Turkey, if there is something like a civil war in Turkey, which I think some Western powers are planning, the whole Balkans is going to explode. Political stability of Turkey and economic strength of Turkey is very important for the Balkans. And in fact, from what I'm hearing is that it is some extremists from the Balkans, from Bosnia and Kosovo, who were involved in the coup against Erdogan. In other words, from the Balkans, who are these people? These are people who are influenced by NATO and the U.S. intelligence services, and they're based in the Balkans. So I think at this point of time, it's very important for Turkey to preserve political stability. And I think many people in the Balkans want that. They want Turkey to continue its economic prosperity the way it has been prosperous in the last decade, and also to be politically stable.
Well, that's a very good point there, Filip, and it leads me to this question here. We have recently seen the leaders from the U.S., leaders from Russia, and leaders from China all visiting the Balkans. So they, of course, would see the significance of this region. Well, I mean, what do you see coming out of these meetings?
Definitely. What I'm seeing is the geopolitical shift to the east. However, this shift is not going to be an easy one. Because the West, and here I'm talking about the U.S. military industrial intelligence complex and also NATO, they are not going to be are very happy to see this, and they'll do everything they can to delay or stop this inevitable shift to the east. And the only way they can delay it or stop it is to create trouble, to create social unrest and political disintegration. So they may even be supporting at some point of time, even the opposition in some of these Balkan countries in order to create more confusion and more unrest and more social fragmentation. Because what the West and the NATO are offering the Balkans is not a long-term long-term economic strategy. In other words, they cannot offer the investment that these countries need to get back on their feet. But the Chinese can, and they have been doing this. The Chinese have been doing this. They are investing in long-term infrastructure projects. They are not interested in ideological reshaping of the Balkans. And this is the key. The West has always been interested in changing the minds, not simply giving the money, but also with the money you also need to subscribe to an ideology. Whereas the East, the Russians and also the Chinese especially, they are not interested in that. They are interested in economic buildup of these countries because they see the global community, I think, as a more harmonious place than the West. And plus, the West is much weaker. In fact, without this strategy of divide and conquer, it would not be able to have so much power as it does today.
Well, there are two things that are actually both are related that I want to get your take on, Filip. One is, do you see currently it looks like there are some attractive bribery that is being thrown before Turkey by the United States and NATO, including the Kurdish element. If we do this and give you this much of that and that much of that, and if we give you an opportunity to save face, because of course Turkish government, President Erdogan wants to save face. He says, I demand this and this from the West. So even if they don't get it, the West can give them some sort of a whitewash version of what they want and say, okay, now you can save face and we're going to give you this and this. But let's say, hypothetically, Turkey indeed decides decisively to shift towards the east and moves forward with Russia. Will you see that as a domino effect in the region, meaning a shift that would be very quickly followed by, let's say, Greece and other nations in the Balkan? Would it have the domino effect? And if so, wouldn't this be more of a reason for the US and NATO to cause the social unrest and not let this happen no matter what the price is?
Definitely, Sibel. They are going to try to stop it no matter what. If it means creating a civil war in Turkey, they'll do it. If it means creating a civil war in Greece, they'll do it. In Serbia, they'll do it. In other words, they won't stop. And this is why the people there have to be very careful in making their political choices. This is the time of very difficult but very important political decisions. And so what I'm seeing is that the shift to the east is inevitable, but it may cause quite a lot of conflict in this area.
Well, the other question, which is related, and you touched upon it at the beginning, and I'm so glad that you did, Filip. You talked about how ideologies are created on the ground, through academia and especially through the NGOs. And all these issues and all these coup-related awakening that came out of this whole process since July 15 includes the public sentiment in Turkey against various Western-backed alternative media organizations and NGOs, in particular NGOs that are associated with George Soros. For example, George Soros has this Open Society organization in Turkey. They have actually a major office in Istanbul, and they have been very, very active since the early 2000s. And when I say active, we are not talking about only, let's say, innocent scholarships or some kind of economic aids to certain disadvantaged regions. We are talking about on the political front. I mean, as bold as actually creating particular political figures and backing for them, and a lot of them disguised, hidden behind some beautiful, pretty adjectives for transparency, for liberalization of the media in Turkey, for human rights. As you know, they usually advertise with such wonderful adjectives and concept. And we also know that these NGOs have been extremely active in the Balkans, more so than I would say in terms of intensity than Turkey since the fall of the Soviet Union. In fact, some of the whistleblowers organizations, I usually refer to them as the so-called whistleblowers organizations, such as POGO, Project on Government Oversight, GAP, Government Accountability Projects. They receive a big chunk of their millions of dollars per year from George Soros, but they were sent to places like Romania, Poland, or Czech Republic to open offices and encourage government whistleblowers there. Now, this is when here in the United States, whistleblowers don't have any ability to obtain legal representations. We see how they are treated, and there's actually no support from these organizations here in the US, yet they are setting up whistleblowers organizations, media transparency organizations, FOIA, like government transparency organizations in the Balkans. And I wanted to find out what is the general public sentiment, knowing his fame. People such as George Soros, he's not the only one. There are several global philanthropists who are using these types of NGOs to take hold and gain power in these nations. How would you assess the status of those NGOs today in the Balkans and the public sentiment in regard to those activities, operations of these NGOs in the Balkans?
The NGOs and foundations are very important elements of soft power that the West has used to ideologically reshape not only the Balkans, but also Eastern Europe, Latin America, Africa, and so on. They act essentially as gatekeepers. They only go so far in their activities. In other words, they do not question the primary orientation of Western geopolitics, which is the control of territories and resources. In other words, the best of those NGOs and organizations, they can do little bit. The best of them. The worst, of course, are simply propaganda agents of different intelligence organizations. But there are some that do some good work, and yet their good work is not questioning the basic precepts of neoliberalism. So what I'm saying here is that the whole concept of NGOs, in my opinion, was developed essentially to neutralize the power of the people. In other words, these are organizations that put pressure on the government, but they are not actually taking power in the government. So quite a lot of people spend their time in NGOs, well-meaning people that I know well, and they think they do great work. However, unless they have the levers of power, they cannot make the changes that they are talking about. They may be very idealistic. They may prepare excellent law proposals. They may do excellent studies of corruption and so on. But they have no power to implement any of these proposals or to make any changes in the corruption networks, because they are not the police. They are not the investigators. They are not the courts. They are not the prosecutors. So in a certain sense, it's a deception. It's a philosophically speaking, it's a deception. They put pressure on the government, but the government is not going to do anything about that. And I'm talking about the best of the cases. I'm not talking about those ones who who are essentially propaganda agents of the, as I said, Western intelligence services. And this is not only the CIA. Let's not forget about the MI6. Let's not forget about the German BND. I mean, sometimes in some podcasts in the alternative media, we only talk about we hear only about the CIA. The CIA is the strongest, has the most money. It's probably the most lethal. But there are all these other, secret service organizations. They have a longer tradition in the Balkans than the CIA. I'm talking about the MI6. The other side is also active. The Turkish MIT and the Russian GRU and SVR are also active. But it's at this point of time, it's the West that has the upper hand, because they have developed all these tools. They have transformed the system to fit their view of the world. Now, if we talk about the specific organizations, I would point out the Atlantic Council. The Atlantic Council is an organization directly sponsored by NATO. It has offices in all of the Balkan countries, and it pushes forward the NATO agenda. It presents NATO as the champion of human rights and democracy and the rule of law. And that's the kind of the biggest deception ever. That's the joke. That's a cosmic joke. But Sibel, as you were saying, I think the power of these organizations is declining because the general push from the West is declining, and also in the West itself, within the European Union. And I talk about this in my articles. There is a rift between the Atlanticist faction, the pro-American faction, and the continentalist pro-European faction. And what I'm seeing more and more in Germany and in France especially is that this continentalist faction, which wants to construct the axis Paris, Berlin, Moscow, is getting stronger and stronger. And I think this is the reason that we are seeing a lot of so-called terrorist acts in France, is that the forces who are behind these acts, whether the secret intelligence services are behind them or they are just letting them happen, which is also what happens some of the times. They know something's going to happen and they just let it happen. We don't know that, but they are putting pressure on the French government of François Hollande. And I can tell you the presidential elections in France are coming up next year. And even Nicolas Sarkozy, who was the most pro-NATO French president ever. I mean, Nicolas Sarkozy brought France back into NATO. He, at this point of time, is talking about lifting sanctions against Russia. He's talking about cooperation with Russia. So what I am seeing in Europe is a big shift, not only in the Balkans, but also in France and in Germany, huge, big European players. And so what I'm expecting to see is the instigation of social chaos, not only in the Balkans, but also in France and in Germany. I see a lot of pressure on Angela Merkel as we speak. And Angela Merkel, according to my sources, is friendly to Vladimir Putin, even though publicly this may not appear, because there are so many things going on at the same time. So the whole Europe is in flux. The European Union is falling apart, not because of Brexit, but because there is this Paris, Berlin, Moscow axis that's coming back that many people talked about in the 50s, in the 60s. For instance, the French president Charles de Gaulle was one of the biggest advocates of this foreign policy agenda. But we know that de Gaulle, there were about 30 assassination attempts against de Gaulle. And what did de Gaulle do? He took France out of NATO and he expelled the NATO headquarters from Paris into Belgium. And this was in the days of the Soviet Union. So think about this. So the capitalist France wanted to cooperate with the Soviet Union in the 50s and 60s, in the 60s under de Gaulle. And yet today, when Russian system is not all that different, we have Russia as an enemy. So this is not logical, and it's not going to last.
Well, that's definitely very interesting. What do you have your eye on here? I'd like to ask both of you that. Like, what are the big key things that you were both keeping your eyes on? I know that obviously Sibel, Turkey, and Philip, the Balkans, but what do you see coming? I know there's elections coming up soon, parliamentary elections in Russia, and there's the presidential elections coming up here in the U.S. Lots of things happening around the world, that's for sure.
Well, I would call all those distractions. I wouldn't even call those important developments in any way. But I was mesmerized when Philip brought up the issue of nobody talks about MI6. Nobody talks really about the Brits when all these modus operandis that we are looking at, they were invented by the British Empire. They have been finessed. They have been turned into a form of art. The spy game, and to utilizing religion to cause chaos behind the scenes. And interestingly, because Brits have this quiet way of doing all sorts of, excuse my language, crap around the world, while Americans tend to do it the cowboy style. We do it loud and boldly, and we take the heat for it. But Brits have always gone about quietly behind the scene, causing all these things. And in Iran, for example, people were so aware of it. In fact, there was a joke saying that if you were to shave these Ayatollah's beard, do you know what you'll see? It says made in UK. And if you look at the people like not only Khomeini was in France for in exile, but many top figures, some of them are still alive. For example, Ayatollah Rafsanjani. All these people, they got educated in Britain, and they have still to date their bank accounts there. They still send these main Ayatollah, their children, to get educated in the UK. And as far as pitting Shias against Sunnis, the Kurds against the Turks, this game was invented by the British Empire. And today, they are still playing the most important role, but interestingly, they do it in a quiet way. There's this famous movie, I don't know if you have watched it, The Quiet American with Michael Caine. You've got to watch that because it is the modus operandi. We like to do the yeehaw, we put the base in there in Kyrgyzstan, Manas Airport, we talk tough. And actually, we have all the CIA operations behind the scene too. But Brits always do it so quietly. So during all these discussions, as Philip mentioned, nobody ever puts the heat or turns up the heat on the Brits. They just sit back quietly and laugh when in fact they are playing a major role with all these factions on the ground and small civil wars that are being created. So I'm so glad you brought it up. And as far as keeping my eyes on which topics today, I am not even looking at the elections in the US. I don't believe it's going to be important in any way. I think global geopolitical shift that we are witnessing right now around the globe is where we should be really looking at. And I believe, again, this may go all quiet, it's possible with Turkey, but we are looking at a very unusual, unprecedented shift here, possible shift that may be kindling from Turkey and then is going to spread from there, whether it's in the Balkans or elsewhere. I know, again, Philip had a great article, it still is up there on our website, on China and China's influence. Just like the Chechens being pitted against the Russians in mainland Russia, the CIA, the MI6, I won't forget to mention it after this. I'm going to put them together, Philip, because you're absolutely right. For the past 2 decades, they have been preparing and arming and training this faction, the minority faction in Xinjiang area in China. And this is the most strategic point where all the pipelines go through to China, whether it's coming from Caucasus, Central Asia, whether it's coming from Turkmenistan, or whether it's going to come through Iran and Afghanistan. Xinjiang is where it has to pass through. Well, Xinjiang population are this ethnic minority Turkic people. They are Muslim, and so they have been going through this uprising against China, the government there. But all of them is being orchestrated here from the United States and, of course, the Great Britain. And the fact that the leader of all these terrorism that are being brought about in China was declared the president in absentia here in the United States. The guy has been in the United States since 1998, 1996. His name is Yusuf Turani, and he's the guy who is actually, together with Fethullah Gulen, they have these channels to create these uprising, creating mullahs in Xinjiang as well, and all the things against China. And China knows all about this. But as Filip said, it's not the modus operandi. How many bases has China built around the world? People say, well, China is one of the top 3 powers, right? China is not in the business of building bases, military bases, none. We have there Taiwan. Look at us. Right there, so close, because we have that kind of cowboy mentality. We have Manas Air Base in Kyrgyzstan. Okay, we want Azerbaijan to be part of Russia. We are all about the United States, the West, about empire building, military bases, weapons, war, and destruction. And the record is there for everyone, all our viewers to go and see. Go, people, count the number of bases, military bases built and put in place by Russians around the world. How many military bases are you going to find? Then go and count the ones built by China and see how many military bases China has. What they do is, yes, they go to Africa and they build infrastructure and they make business deals, the Chinese. And Russia seems to be, to a certain degree, following the same modus operandi. But then look at us in the West. It's all about force, wars, destructions, chaos, and the ethnic tensions that sells weapons. We are only, basically, we seem to be only in weapons business. No other goods matter to us. And again, because of that, I would be keeping my eye, especially this year, on Turkey, the Balkans, the moves by Russia, what's going to come into fruition with Iran. I know they have put the lid on it temporarily towards the end of Obama's presidency, but Iran issue is not dead. It's going to be revived no matter who's going to be the president, whether it's going to be Trump or Hillary Clinton. Obama had on his plate Libya and Syria, and to a certain degree, continuation of Afghanistan, well, and Yemen through Saudi Arabia. But I believe the shift is going to be going back to Iran again, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Trump. And I would love to get Filip's take on this.
Well, Sibel, you mentioned so many issues, and I keep my eye on some of the same issues that you mentioned. I have to say that what we have to look at is the militarization of the CIA becoming more like Pentagon, developing its own army, and under U.S. laws, it has much more authority to do all kinds of things outside of the United States than the Pentagon, which is not to say that the Pentagon is not doing it anyway. But there is much less control on the CIA because they function under different U.S. laws. So I'll be looking at the intensification of the militarization of the CIA, in the increase of drone warfare in the Middle East, the targeted killing, including of American citizens, which is a horrible new development that Obama has started, happened under Obama. For the first time, the U.S. killed a U.S. citizen without any charges being leveled. Somebody in the White House decided that this person has to die, and he was killed. And this is going on as we speak. So we'll see further militarization in the world. In terms of the specific countries and issues, I'm also looking at Turkey because, as I said before, the political stability of Turkey is extremely important for the Balkans. If something happens in Turkey, if there is some kind of a civil war, the whole thing is going to explode in the Balkans. There's going to be civil war in Bosnia and Kosovo, all over. And obviously, that's something that we have to avoid at all costs. I'm also looking at North Korea. We are focusing so much on Europe, but when everybody's looking at Europe, something happens in some other part of the world. South China Sea as well. In fact, the U.S. will begin putting more and more pressure on China in the coming months and years. Because, as I said, because China is now in the Balkans, is in Eastern Europe, it's giving a lot of money to these countries under the terms that are convenient to the Chinese government. This is not, we are not talking about humanitarian projects. This is what I want people to understand here, that all these great powers have their own foreign policy agendas, and they are not democratic. They're about control of resources and territories. So what we have to have in the world in order to have peace is some kind of balance of powers. This is what we are looking at. We are not, the U.S. wants to have hegemony, wants to be the world's policeman. And in fact, I have to mention Politico, because Politico is a news organization that we talked about last time when I was on this podcast, and we said that Politico is pushing NATO even more strongly in Europe than the Voice of America and Radio Free Europe, the typical propaganda organizations for the U.S. hegemony. So Politico has recently had an interview with Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who's the former NATO Secretary General, probably the most aggressive anti-Russian Secretary General in NATO history. And he basically said that he wants the United States to be the world's policeman. This is what he said. And you know what? Hillary Clinton is going to listen to him, because this is what Hillary Clinton wants. And if she gets elected, and she has a great chance of getting elected because she is dependable. In other words, she listens to what the military industrial intelligence complex is saying. We'll have that. We'll have the United States trying to be the world's policeman at the tremendous expense of the U.S. taxpayers, people living in the United States, and the other people who are not citizens like myself, but who are also paying taxes to the U.S. government. And so my money is also being used to fund all these wars against people that I think are right. So I think it's high time for the people in the United States also to think about that, and to essentially reject both presidential candidates, and to try to develop, to be active, and to develop other political options. So what I'm saying here is we are moving toward a very, very chaotic world. And the world is on the edge. I don't want to sound like the prophet of doom, but the world is on the edge, and it's not. I mean, the final responsibility is going to be in Washington D.C. if something big happens, not in Moscow, not in Beijing, because those powers are much smaller. I mean, look at Russia. Its military budget is 7 times smaller than the U.S. military budget. In other words, for every dollar that Russia is spending, U.S. is spending $7. So they have 7 times more of everything. So in other words, Russia cannot hegemonize the world, and neither does it want. It doesn't want that. It wants some kind of modus vivendi, which is not to say that there are not many problems, domestic problems in Russia, because there are. And so people in all countries have to put pressure on their governments to change. But there are some governments who are more militaristic than others. Not everybody is equal. Not everybody carries the equal responsibility. And I really blame the U.S. military industrial complex, U.S. intelligence services, and NATO for not being able to provide a economically and politically sustainable model for the Balkans. Now it's too late. Now the best thing for them would essentially be to withdraw from there, to get the troops out, to get the bases out. But they're not going to do that, unfortunately, unless there is a pressure on them here from the United States, from the U.S. citizens and voters here in this country.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of the citizens probably don't even know what NATO stands for, or supposedly stands for. But just before we started recording this, I had seen an article from the Telegraph that was very pro-NATO. So I mean, it's not just like you said, the Voices of America and Politico and all these news outlets, as well as NGOs that are promoting this expansionist agenda. It's all over the place. We're seeing it, and you're right. The power does lie within the people. The gist of that Telegraph article was how great NATO was, and that the Royal Air Force launched and scrambled a few jets to protect the Baltic skies from the Russian bandit planes that were flying nearby. And so it was it's pretty obvious to me when I see this kind of stuff that it's definitely pro-NATO propaganda trying to continue to demonize Russia. And they're trying to salvage, like you said, the Balkans here, trying to influence when Russia and China offer what the Baltic people want, really, which is political, economic stability, something that the NATO in the West can't offer. So
let's not forget about this axis that's emerging: Paris, Berlin, Moscow. Let's not forget about that. I expect to see more examples of this axis coming into being in the coming months, and I find that very encouraging.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And I think we are going to have back-to-back follow-ups because things are heating up in the region. So we are going to have you back, and we publish, of course, your analysis, great analysis, regularly at Boiling Frogs Post and Newsbud. And this will go on YouTube channel, but it also will be at Newsbud website. And we are looking forward to your coming articles, Filip.
Thank you, Sibel. Thank you, Spiro. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.